They broke everything Thomas ever built, every single thing, and they laughed while they did it. Evelyn Harper stood in the mud, pressing a splintered piece of wood against her chest, the remains of a handmade sign her late husband carved with his own hands. 6 trucks, 6 young men, and a farm that had stood for 40 years gone in one morning. Here is what they never counted on. Thomas Harper had spent his entire life doing favors for people who never forgot. And one of those people was watching. If this story moves you, subscribe to this channel, follow every part until the very end, and drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The phone rang at 5:47 in the morning. Evelyn Harper did not want to answer it. She had been awake since 4, the way she always was these days, lying still in the dark, listening to the silence of a house that used to breathe with someone else's presence. Thomas had been gone for 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days. She had stopped counting the days out loud. She never stopped counting them inside. She reached for the phone. It was her neighbor, Dale Hutchins, who owned the property half a mile east. His voice was tight in a way that immediately made her stomach drop. "You need to look outside right now." She said, "Dale, it's not even 6 in the morning. I know what time it is. Look outside, please." She set her feet on the cold floor and walked to the window. For a moment, she did not understand what she was seeing. 6 trucks, big ones, the kind that cost more money than most people in Willow Creek made in a year. They had broken through the old wooden gate at the front of the property, the gate Thomas built by hand in the summer of 1987, the one he painted because Evelyn told him green was the color of something living. The gate lay in pieces across the gravel drive, and those 6 trucks were still moving. "Well," she said quietly, "Dale, someone is on my property." "I know." "Evelyn, I already called the sheriff. Just don't go out there alone." She was already moving. She pulled on her boots and her coat over her nightgown and pushed through the back door into the cold Montana air, and what she saw when she stepped outside would stay with her for the rest of her life. 6 young men, none of them older than 30, they were laughing. Them had a phone out, recording. Another was driving his truck in slow circles through the vegetable beds she had planted in early spring, the ones she had tended every single morning since the frost broke. Greenhouse, which she and Thomas had built together piece by piece over 3 summers, was being dismantled, not knocked over by accident, taken apart deliberately, methodically, like someone had planned it. And they were laughing. "Hey," her voice came out louder than she expected. "Hey, what are you doing? Get off my property." The young man with the phone turned toward her. He was blonde, wearing a jacket that probably cost $1,000, and he was smiling the way people smile when they believe they cannot be touched by anything. "Ma'am," he said. He kept filming. "Get out," she said. Get out right now. The sheriff has been called. You are trespassing on private property and I want you to leave." Another one of them leaned out of a truck window. "We're just having a look around," he said. "Nice place. Be a shame if it stayed like this." She did not understand that sentence then. She would understand it later. One of the trucks backed over the wooden sign near the main path, the one Thomas had carved himself, letter by careful letter in the last summer before his health began to fail. "Farm Est, 1974, built with love." The truck rolled over it once, then reversed and rolled over it again. Evelyn made a sound she had never made before in her life. Not a scream, not a cry, something between the two. Something that came from a place so deep inside her she did not know the place existed. She crossed the yard in her boots, her coat flapping open in the cold, and she knelt in the mud and picked up the pieces of that sign with both hands. The blond young man filmed her doing it, and then as casually as they had arrived, the trucks began to leave. One by one, they rolled back through the broken gate and onto the road. The blond young man was the last to go. He lowered his phone, looked at her kneeling in the mud, and said nothing. Just smiled and left. Evelyn stayed in the mud for a long time. Sheriff Tom Bauer arrived 20 minutes later. He was 54 years old, a quiet man with a face that had seen enough trouble to stop being surprised by it. He walked the property with her, took photographs, wrote things in his notebook. "Do you know who they were?" she asked. "Not yet," he said. "Did Dale get a plate number?" "He got a partial on one." She stopped walking. "Tom, they had those trucks for a reason. Expensive trucks like that don't show up at a widow's farm at 5 in the morning for no reason." "Sent them." He met her eyes. "Evelyn, someone sent them," she said again. "I've lived on this land for 40 years and nobody has ever touched it. I refused a purchase offer 3 weeks ago, and now this happens. You tell me that's a coincidence?" He was quiet for a moment. "Purchase offer," he said. She told him about Richard Caldwell. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted, a small, careful shift, like a door opening just a crack before someone thought better of it and pushed it mostly shut again. "I'll look into it," he said. He left 2 hours later. She watched his cruiser pull down the road, and she stood there in the wreckage of her gate, holding the broken pieces of Thomas's sign, and she felt something she had not allowed herself to feel since Thomas died. She felt completely alone. She went inside. She made coffee she did not drink. She sat at the kitchen table, where Thomas used to read the newspaper every morning, and she stared at the window, and she tried to think. Daughter Patricia called at 8. "Mom, I saw the news. It's Mom. Someone posted a video online of what happened this morning. It has a lot of views." Evelyn closed her eyes. "How many views?" A pause. "A lot, Mom. People in the comments some of them are being very cruel. They're calling it funny. Some of them are sharing it like it's entertainment." Evelyn said nothing. "Mom, are you okay?" "I'm going to be fine, Patricia. You should come stay with me and Marcus for a while." He was. "I am not leaving this farm." "Mom, Patricia." Her voice was quiet, but it carried something in it that her daughter recognized, the tone that had always meant the conversation on that particular subject was finished. "I am not leaving this farm. Your father built this farm. I will not be pushed off land that Thomas Harper worked his hands raw to build." By anyone, a long silence. "Okay," Patricia said softly. "Hey, Mom." After she hung up, Evelyn sat for a long time. Then she picked up her phone again and looked at what her daughter had described. The video was already everywhere. It had been posted to multiple platforms overnight. The thumbnail on one version showed her kneeling in the mud, holding the broken signs, and the caption someone had written over it read, "She actually cried." The comments below that video had received over 12,000 replies. She put the phone face down on the table. She folded her hands in her lap, and she said out loud to the empty kitchen, to the chair across from her where Thomas used to sit, "What do I do?" The kitchen was quiet. She already knew what Thomas would have said. He would have said, "You don't fight them the way they want you to fight. You make them show you who they really are. And then you let everybody see it." It was Dale Hutchins who made the call. Not because he was asked to, not because he knew exactly what it would start. Dale Hutchins was 70 years old and had grown up watching his own father lose a piece of farmland to a company that had no right to it, and he had carried that story in his chest like a stone for 50 years. And he was not willing to watch it happen again. To the woman who, the week after Thomas Harper's funeral, had walked over to his property with Eckersroll and sat with him on the porch for 2 hours because she knew Dale had been grieving too, and she did not want him to grieve alone. Dale had a phone number he had kept in a very old address book for 15 years. He had never used it. He used it now. The man who answered was named Walter Cross, though most people who knew him called him by something else entirely. He was 61 years old. He had a voice like gravel and a face that had seen more of the country than most people twice his age. He had met Thomas Harper 17 years ago, under circumstances that most people would consider unusual, but which Walter Cross considered entirely ordinary because in his world, the measure of a person was not where you met them, or what they were wearing when you did, whether they showed up when it mattered. And Thomas Harper had shown up. Walter had never forgotten that. "Dale," he said, when he heard the voice on the other end. "I'm sorry to call out of nowhere like this. Apologize." "What happened?" Dale told him. Walter Cross listened without interrupting. He was standing in the kitchen of a house in Billings, looking at his phone, watching the video that had already spread to every corner of the internet. This video of a woman he had never personally met kneeling in mud, holding broken pieces of something her dead husband had built, while a group of rich young men filmed her and laughed. When Dale finished, Walter said, "Is she all right?" "Physically, shook up, but she won't leave the farm. You know how Thomas was about that land." "Yeah," Walter said. A pause. "Walter," Dale said, "I don't know who else to call." "You called the right person," Walter said. "I'll make some calls. Give me a couple of days." He hung up. He stood in his kitchen for another minute, looking at the video. Then he watched it again from the beginning. He watched the blond young man smile at the camera. He watched the truck roll over the sign. He watched Evelyn Harper kneel in the mud. He set the phone down on the counter. He took a slow breath. Then he picked it up again and opened his contacts and started scrolling. Within 48 hours, the situation had grown beyond anything Evelyn expected. The video kept spreading. National news picked it up. Porter from a television station in Missoula showed up at her gate, which was now a temporary wire fence because the original gate was in pieces, and asked if she would speak on camera. She said no. He left a card. Richard Caldwell, through a spokesperson, issued a statement saying he had no connection to the incident and calling the destruction of Mrs. Harper's property deeply unfortunate. He expressed his sympathy. He said he hoped the perpetrators would be brought to justice. He said all the right things. Evelyn read the statement on her phone and put it down without changing her expression. The thing was, two of the young men's families released their own statements through lawyers. Family said their son had been in the wrong place at the wrong time and had made a serious error in judgment. Another stated that their client cooperated fully with authorities and urged a measured response. Sheriff Tom Bauer announced that charges were being investigated. About the language he used, he said vandalism, he said trespass. He did not say anything about who might have organized it or why. The comments on the news articles ranged from outrage to mockery. Some people were furious on Evelyn's behalf. Others questioned why she would not sell such a large piece of land at her age. Others made jokes that Evelyn did not read past the first line. On the third day after the attack, a Thursday morning, Evelyn was repairing the wire fence at the gate when she heard motorcycles on the road. She turned. There were 3 of them. They slowed and pulled off the road just outside her gate. The men who climbed off wore leather vests with patches she recognized. She had seen those patches in news reports, in documentaries. She had seen them associated, over the years, with a certain kind of reputation. Very still. The man in the front was Walter Cross. She did not know his name yet, but she recognized something in his face, the particular stillness of a person who has spent a long time learning not to react before he understands what he is reacting to. He stopped at the wire fence. "Mrs. Harper," he said. She said, "My name is Walter Cross. I knew your husband." "Not well, but enough for it to matter. Dale Hutchins called me." She looked at him for a long moment. "Dale called you," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "And you drove from Billings," he said. "About 4 hours." She looked at the 3 of them. Then she looked at Walter Cross again. "Why?" He was quiet for a moment, as if considering whether to give her the short answer or the real one. He chose the real one, because Thomas Harper was one of the 3 or 4 people in my life who showed up when it cost him something to show up. I have a long list of those people. I tend to keep track of them. He paused. And because whoever did this made a mistake, not a vandalism mistake, a planning mistake. They left a trail. I don't know exactly what it looks like yet, but I have people who can find out. Evelyn was quiet. The morning wind came across the fields and moved through the wire fence. "Kind of people," she said. "People who are good at noticing things," Walter said. "People who ask questions in places where official investigators might not know where to look." And was. "People who have been in this state long enough to know where the bodies are buried, figuratively speaking." She looked at him steadily. "You're talking about Hell's Angels." He didn't flinch. "Yes, ma'am." She was silent for a long moment. The wind moved through the fence again. Then she unhooked the wire latch on the gate and pushed it open. "Come in," she said. "I'll put the coffee on." What happened in her kitchen that morning would change everything. Walter Cross was not what the stories about him suggested. He was not loud. He was not aggressive. He sat at her kitchen table at Thomas's chair, though he didn't know that, and he drank his coffee black, and he listened. He listened the way Thomas used to listen, completely, without interrupting, without letting his eyes drift to the window, or his phone, or anywhere other than the person speaking. She told him everything. She told him about the first offer from Richard Caldwell, which came 14 months ago through a real estate intermediary. A polished young woman in a good suit who had presented a number that Evelyn supposed was meant to seem generous. She had said no. She told him about the second offer 6 months later, which was significantly higher. She had said no again. She told him about the third offer, which came by mail, a formal letter from Caldwell's development company, presenting what it called a final and comprehensive offer with a deadline. She had not responded to the deadline. She had filed the letter away. She told him about the small things that had started happening after the third offer. A section of fencing that had been cut, she had assumed it was kids. A water pipe that had mysteriously sprung a leak in the section of the field farthest from the house, in a spot nobody would notice without walking the whole property. A delivery that went missing, not a major one, but enough to cause her a half-day's inconvenience. She had not connected these things. Until now. Walter Cross sat with his hands wrapped around his coffee mug and he said, "How long between the deadline on that third letter and this morning?" She thought about it. 3 weeks, maybe 3.5. He nodded slowly. "And you haven't heard from Caldwell directly? Never in person? Always through intermediaries." "That's deliberate," he said. "He doesn't want his name attached to anything direct." The other man, a big quiet man named Ray, who had not said a word since arriving, shifted in his seat. "Classic buffer strategy," he said. "You use middlemen for the pressure. If anything goes wrong, there's enough distance between you and the action that you can claim ignorance." Evelyn looked at Ray. "How do you know about that?" Ray gave a small, dry smile. "We've dealt with people like Caldwell before," he said. "The names change. The playbook doesn't." Walter said, "Mrs. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." She met his eyes. "Ask. Are you prepared for this to get harder before it gets easier? Because if we start pulling at this thread, and I think there's a very long thread to pull, Caldwell is going to know someone is looking. And when men like Caldwell feel cornered, they don't go quiet. They push harder." She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the window. She looked at the fields outside, the damaged beds, the empty space where the greenhouse frame used to stand. Then she said, "Mr. Cross, I watched my husband spend 35 years building something on this land. I watched pour every single thing he had into this soil and this family and these fences and sent that sign that's lying in pieces out there. He did not build it so someone could buy it out from under me when he was no longer here to say no alongside me. He did not build it so some man who never worked a day of honest physical labor in his life could tear it apart with other people's money and turn it into luxury condominiums." She set her coffee cup down. "Pull the thread," she said. "Pull every single one of them." Walter Cross looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and shook her hand. "Yes, ma'am," he said. That afternoon, Walter made the calls he had been turning over in his mind since Dale's phone rang at the start of the week. He talked to a man named Eddie Flores in Great Falls, who worked construction and had, over the course of 2 decades of working in the industry, developed a detailed mental map of which contractors took jobs from which developers and why. He talked to a woman named Shelley Briggs in Missoula, who had spent 15 years as a county records clerk and knew more about land title history in the western part of the state than any attorney in any firm. He talked to a retired investigator named Phil Drummond, who had spent 2 decades doing work that combined legal and extra-legal information gathering in ways that Drummond himself described only as practical. He talked to 4 more members of his chapter, and 4 members of a chapter based out of Helena. He talked for 6 hours. By the end of the day, the outline of what they were looking at had begun to take shape, not the full picture, not yet. Enough of a shape that Walter Cross understood something with a certainty that settled heavy in his chest. This was not about a widow's farm. This was bigger than that. And Richard Caldwell had been very, very careful to make sure that nobody who could cause him trouble would ever find out exactly how much bigger, which meant that the first thing they needed to do before any confrontation, before any public action, before any pressure, was find the one piece of evidence that Caldwell could not make disappear. They needed to find the recording. They did not know yet that it existed, but they would. Evelyn did not sleep well that night, but she had stopped sleeping well 3 years ago, so this was not new. She lay in the bed she had shared with Thomas and looked at the ceiling and thought about the faces at her kitchen table that morning. Walter's stillness raised quiet certainty. The third man whose name she had learned was Kevin, and who had mostly listened and taken notes in a small spiral notebook he carried in his vest pocket. She thought about the fact that she had opened her gate to them. She thought about what Thomas would have said about that. She thought he would have said, "Those are men who know the difference between power that serves itself and power that serves something else. You can feel it when you're sitting across from them. I'll take men like that over a room full of people in expensive suits every single time." She reached over and put her hand on Thomas's side of the bed. Still, the way it had been for 3 years. "I opened the gate," she said aloud, "to nobody, to him, to the dark ceiling. I think you would have too." Outside, the Montana night was completely silent, and in a house 400 miles away, In a city Evelyn had never visited, a man named Richard Caldwell sat in his study and looked at reports on his phone and felt, first time in many years, a small, cold prickling at the back of his neck. Fear, not exactly. Just the faint particular sensation of something he could not immediately identify. The sensation of a thread being pulled. He poured himself a drink. He told himself it was nothing. He was wrong. The thread began to unravel faster than any of them expected. Walter Cross had told Evelyn to expect 2 days before he had anything concrete. He had been wrong about the timeline, not because his people were slow, but because what Shelley Briggs found in the county records office on that first morning moved everything forward by about 48 hours. Shelley called Walter at 7:14 a.m. on a Friday. "Walter," she said without preamble, "how well do you know the water rights situation in Cascade County?" "Not well enough, apparently," he said. "Tell me." I pulled the title history on Evelyn Harper's parcel, going back to original filing. Standard stuff, but then I cross-referenced it against Caldwell's development applications in the state registry, because if he wanted land badly enough to do what he did, he had to have filed something somewhere that shows why. She paused. "Walter, there is an underground aquifer beneath that farm. A significant one, and I mean significant. It runs under approximately 40% of the Harper parcel and extends northeast." Walter was quiet for a moment. "How significant?" "The kind that becomes a municipal water source for a development of 500 to 800 units, Shelley said. "The kind that if you own the land rights above it, gives you negotiating power with 3 counties simultaneously. And that doesn't show up on standard surveys unless you're specifically looking for it or unless someone paid for a geological study and buried the results." And Caldwell paid for the study 18 months ago. A shell company called Blue Ridge Land Assessment, LLC, registered in Delaware. We found the connection because Eddie knows a contractor who did site work for Caldwell last year and mentioned the name offhand. Another pause. He knew exactly what was under that farm before he ever sent the first offer letter. Every one of those offers was made with full knowledge of what he was really buying. Cross sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "He wasn't buying a farm." "No," Shelley said. "He was buying a water empire. And Evelyn Harper was sitting on top of it without knowing it existed." Walter hung up. He sat very still for about 30 seconds. Then he called Ray. "We need to go back to the farm," he said. "Today. And we need to tell her the truth about what's under her feet." Ray said, "How's she going to take it?" Walter thought about the woman who had looked him in the eye across her kitchen table and said, "Pull the thread." He thought about the way her voice hadn't broken when she said it. He thought about the way she had held the pieces of that broken sign against her chest in the mud. "Caldwell is banking on," he said. They were at Evelyn's farm by 11. She listened to everything Shelley had found without interrupting. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands folded on the surface in front of her, and she listened the way Walter had listened to her 2 days before completely, without flinching. Walter finished. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Thomas knew." Walter looked at her. "What?" "About 6 years ago, maybe 7, a man came out to the property. Said he was from a land assessment company, wanted to do a routine geological survey, offered to pay for access rights. Said no. He didn't like the man. He didn't like the company name." He said. She stopped. She pressed her lips together for a moment. He said something felt off about the whole thing. That a man doesn't pay you for access to your own land, unless he already knows what he's going to find. The kitchen was very quiet. Ray said, "Thomas turned him away." "Thomas turned him away," Evelyn confirmed. And then about a year later, the same man came back with a different company name on his card. Turned him away again. He never told me who the company was. He just said, "Evelyn, if anyone ever comes asking to look at the ground under this farm, you tell them no and you call a lawyer." She looked at Walter. "I thought he was being overprotective. You know how Thomas was." "I do," Walter said. "Now I think he knew exactly what he was protecting." She looked at her hands on the table. "He just didn't know how far they'd go to take it." Walter said carefully, "Mrs. Harper, this changes the legal picture significantly." Was, if Caldwell commissioned a geological survey through a shell company, bury the results, and then use that information to make offers he knew you'd refuse, in order to create a pretext for pushing me out, she said flatly, "Yes, that is not just vandalism. That is fraud. That is potentially a conspiracy to deprive you of property rights through deliberate intimidation." She looked up at him. Her eyes were clear and very steady. Then we need proof of all of it, she said, not just the survey. Whole chain, who paid who told who what, who made the decision to send those 6 trucks to my gate. That's what we're working on, Walter said. How long? Meditated honestly, she said. A week, maybe 10 days, maybe less if we get lucky. She nodded once. Then I'll be here, she said. Get lucky. What none of them knew, what none of them could have known yet, was that the luck was already in motion, and it was coming from the most unexpected direction possible. Ryan was. His name was Ryan Mitchell. He was 23 years old, the youngest of the 6 men who had been at Evelyn's farm that morning. His father was a mid-level business associate of Caldwell's, not one of the wealthy principals, but close enough to the money that the family had grown comfortable in the way that comfort sometimes produces people who cannot imagine consequences. He was not a bad person. That distinction matters, and it would matter enormously in the days that followed. He was a young man who had been raised around money and influence, and the casual assumption that both of those things were buffers against the kind of reality that other people had to live in. He had gone along that morning because Marcus Webb, the blonde one who had filmed everything, was his oldest friend, Marcus, and because Marcus had framed it as a prank, an adventure, something that would be funny and forgotten. He had not thought deeply about what it would mean to drive his truck through an old woman's greenhouse. He had not thought at all about the sign. He thought about it now. He could not stop thinking about it. He had seen the video, of course. Everyone had seen the video. He had watched it from his phone in his apartment on that first night, and what he had expected to feel the removed, guilty but manageable sensation he had been bracing himself for was not what arrived. What arrived was something much worse, something cold and specific that settled in his chest and would not move. Because in the video, he could see himself in the background, not filming, not laughing as loudly as the others, but there, standing there, watching, doing nothing to stop it. His mother called him on the second day. She was crying. What have you done? She said. It was not a question. I raised you better than that. Your father and I raised you better than that. And Ryan, that poor woman, her husband built that sign. I know, do you? Because I need you to tell me you know, and I need you to mean it. Do you understand what you were a part of? He was quiet for a long time. Yes, he said. I understand. He almost told her then. Almost told her about the other thing, the thing that Marcus didn't know Ryan had, the thing that had been sitting in his phone like a stone in his pocket since the morning it happened. Almost. But his mother was already upset and he needed to think, and so he said he would call her again soon. And he hung up and he sat with the stone in his pocket for 2 more days. On the 4th day, one of Caldwell's lawyers called him. The man's name was Hargrove, and he was very smooth, the kind of smooth that had been professionally cultivated over decades of practice. Ryan, he said warmly, like they were old friends. I just want to make sure you're doing all right through all this. Been a stressful week for everyone. I'm fine, Ryan said. Good. Now, I want to go over a few things with you about how you discuss this situation with other people, journalists, law enforcement, people like that. It's really just a matter of framing, nothing complicated, but we want to make sure everyone is on the same page. What page is that? A brief pause. The page where this was a spontaneous incident without any prior coordination or direction. A group of young men made a very unfortunate and very stupid decision on their own, without any guidance or encouragement from anyone else. Hargrove's voice was still warm, but something in it had shifted just slightly, just enough. Does that make sense to you? Ryan's hand tightened on the phone. You're telling me what to say, he said. I'm giving you advice, Hargrove said smoothly. That is very much in your interest. Whose interest, exactly? A longer pause, Ryan. The warmth was gone now. Just professionalism. The clean, cold edge of it. Your father has a relationship with Mr. Caldwell's organization that has been very beneficial to your family for a long time. I think it would be a shame for everyone if that relationship became complicated by something that can still be handled quietly. Ryan said nothing. Think about it, Hargrove said. Take a day and call me back. The call ended. Ryan sat for a long time without moving. Then he opened his phone and looked again at the video of Evelyn Harper kneeling in the mud, holding the pieces of her husband's sign. He opened his photos. He scrolled back to the morning of the attack, and he looked at the thing he had almost shown his mother, the thing he had been carrying for 4 days, the stone in his pocket. He had not planned to record it. He had been standing near the trucks, far enough back from the others, uncomfortable, in a way he had not known how to name. And his phone had been in his hand, the habit of a generation raised to record everything. And Marcus had been on the phone with someone, not texting, a call. Marcus, and who had not noticed Ryan standing nearby, and had been speaking in a low and tight voice that Ryan had never heard from him before. And what Ryan had heard Marcus say was not the language of a prank. It was not the language of spontaneous stupidity. It was the language of instruction, the language of someone being told what to do and confirming that it would be done, and had not understood it fully in the moment. In the moment, he had just been uncomfortable and confused. His phone, without deliberate intention, had been recording. He had noticed it recording about 40 seconds in. He had not stopped it. He had 40 seconds of audio. In those 40 seconds, Marcus Webb said 3 things that mattered. He said a name. He confirmed a location, and he was. And he said he was, in the flat, businesslike tone of someone repeating instructions. Yeah, all of it. The sign too. The sign too. Ryan Mitchell put his phone face down on the table. He picked it up again. He looked up a number he had found through a mutual contact, a number for a man in Billings named Walter Cross, who, according to that mutual contact, had been asking questions about Evelyn Harper and Richard Caldwell. His thumb hovered over the call button. He thought about Hargrove's voice, the warmth that wasn't warmth. Your father has a relationship with Mr. Caldwell's organization. He thought about his mother saying, I raised you better than that. Call. Walter answered in the second ring. I don't know who you are, Ryan said immediately. Before Walter could speak, I have something you need to hear, and I think I need to get it to you before I lose the nerve to do it. He's still. All right, he said quietly. I'm listening. Take your time. I was there, Ryan said. I was one of them, and I have a recording. The silence on Walter's end lasted exactly 1.5 seconds. Are you right now? Walter said. Ryan told him. Stay there, Walter said. Don't talk to anyone. Don't send that recording anywhere. Don't post it. Don't show it to any of your friends. Can you do that? Yes. I'm going to send someone to you within the hour. Someone you can trust in Ryan. Walter paused. It took something to make this call. I want you to know that. Ryan was quiet for a moment. I don't feel like it took something, he said. I feel like I should have called 3 days ago. 3 days ago or today, Walter said. Either way, you called. He hung up and immediately called Phil Drummond. I need you in Billings tonight, he said. We have a source. Phil Drummond, who had been retired for 4 years and claimed every single day to enjoy it, said, send me the address. Within 2 hours, Phil was sitting across from Ryan Mitchell in a coffee shop in downtown Billings, listening to a 40-second audio recording on a phone held between them on a small table. He listened to it twice. Then he sat back. The name, he says, Phil said carefully. Can you confirm for me whose name that is? Ryan nodded. It's Caldwell's assistant, his personal assistant, not his public staff, his private one. The man who actually runs his schedule and his communications. And you know this how? Because Marcus pointed him out to me once. At a company event my father attended, I remember the face. I remember the name. Phil looked at him steadily. You understand what this means. If this recording connects Marcus Webb's phone call that morning to Caldwell's personal assistant, it establishes that the attack on Evelyn Harper's farm was directed from inside Caldwell's operation. I know what it means, Ryan said. Friends, the other 5 men, they are going to face very different consequences depending on what this recording does and doesn't show. Some of them are going to be angry at you. I know. And Caldwell's lawyers are going to come after this recording and to question its authenticity, its chain of custody, how it was obtained. I know, Ryan said. For the 3rd time, his voice was steady. Mr. Drummond, I was there that morning. I watched them drive over that sign. On purpose. He looked at Phil directly. I'm not doing this because I'm not scared. I'm doing it because I can't keep sitting with it. Phil looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Okay, he said. Here's what we're going to do. The plan was careful and methodical, the kind of thing that Phil Drummond had spent 2 decades building the expertise to execute. The recording needed to be preserved through legitimate channels, needed legal counsel of his own, separate from any attorney connected to Caldwell or the Webb family. The chain of custody for the audio had to be airtight from this moment forward. Phil made 3 calls in the next hour, while Ryan sat at the coffee shop table and drank a cup of coffee he didn't taste and thought about his mother's voice on the phone, saying, I raised you better than that. He had not told Phil everything. There was one more thing, something he hadn't mentioned to Walter Cross on the phone either, because he had not been sure it was relevant, perhaps because he had not been sure trusted anyone enough yet to say it. But as Phil finished his last call and came back to the table with his coat on, Ryan said something else. Phil sat back down. Marcus's phone, Ryan said. When he was on that call, the one I recorded part of, I was close enough to see his screen when he hung up. Contact name wasn't a name. It was initials. 2 letters. He paused. C. Phil Drummond's face did not change, but his eyes sharpened in a way that Ryan noticed immediately. Certain, Phil said. I'm certain. Phil was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Richard Caldwell, he said. It was not a question. That's what I think, Ryan said. Phil pushed his chair back. I need to make another call, he said. Don't go anywhere. He stepped away from the table. Ryan watched him through the window as he stood outside, phone pressed to his ear, not moving. The call lasted less than 2 minutes. When Phil came back in, he sat down and leaned forward with his elbows on the table. Webb's phone records, he said quietly. If we can get a legal subpoena for his call log from that morning, and it shows a direct outgoing call to a number registered to Caldwell or his personal staff, that puts Caldwell on the phone with Marcus, personally, Ryan said, or his assistant. Either way, it collapses the buffer. Phil's voice was controlled, but Ryan could precise careful energy of someone who has just seen the shape of the whole puzzle from a new angle. If this holds, if the call log shows what you think it shows, then the chain goes directly from the attack on that farm to Caldwell's own phone. And looked at the table. Then what do? Phil said. Then we go very carefully, and we go fast. Because once Caldwell's people figure out what you've given us, the window closes. He reached across the table and put his hand briefly on Ryan's arm. You did the right thing, Phil said. I know that doesn't make it feel less complicated. Ryan said. It doesn't. He looked out the window. The street outside was ordinary people walking, cars passing, the completely unremarkable surface of a regular afternoon in a regular city. That recording was on my phone for 4 days, he said. I almost deleted it twice. I almost sent it to Marcus to tell him I had it, just to I don't know, to see what he said. He shook his head. I'm glad I didn't. Why didn't you? Phil asked. Ryan thought about it. Because every time I almost deleted it, he said slowly, I saw that woman kneeling in the mud. I saw her face when she picked up those pieces of that sign. He paused. You don't delete that. You can't. Phil Drummond, who had spent 20 years in rooms where things were deleted routinely and without remorse, looked at the 23-year-old across the table and said nothing. He just nodded. Back at the farm, Evelyn did not know any of this yet. She was repairing the wire fence at the property line, methodically the way Thomas had taught her. Pull it tight. Anchor it properly. Rush the tension, or it won't hold. Hands knew this work. She had done it hundreds of times. She was nearly at the far corner of the front section when her phone rang. Walter, are you at the farm? He said. Where else would I be? I need you to listen to me for a minute, and I need you not to panic. Walter, I don't panic. I know. I'm sorry. A pause. We found something. Actually, someone found something and brought it to us. Recording. From the morning of the attack. The wire fence was very still under her hands. What kind of recording? She said quietly. The kind that connects the attack directly to Caldwell's operation. Not circumstantially. Directly. His voice was steady, but she could hear the weight in it, the particular weight of a person carrying news that is both devastating and necessary. Evelyn, this wasn't just paid vandalism. He was on the phone with Marcus Webb, the young man who organized the group personally or through his immediate staff on the morning it happened. She stood very still. The wind came across the field and moved through the wire. He called them that morning, she said, not a question. Not shock. Just clarity, the flat, clean clarity of something you suspected becoming something you knew. That's what we believe the evidence shows, Walter said, verifying the call records. But the audio, he stopped. It's enough. It's enough to take to people who will have to act on it for a moment. Then she said, who brought it to you? Walter hesitated. One of the young men, he said. The youngest one. He's been carrying it since that morning, and he couldn't keep carrying it. Another long pause. How old is he? She said. 23. She breathed in through her nose. She looked at the fence line. She looked at the fields. She thought about 23 years old, which was the year she and Thomas were married, which was the year they signed the papers on this farm, the year she had been standing exactly where she was standing now, and everything ahead of her had felt like possibility. "Is he all right?" she said. Walter Cross was quiet for a moment that contained something he did not say. "He's scared," he said, "but he's doing the right thing." "Then someone needs to tell him he's doing the right thing," Evelyn said. "Not just for the legal reasons. Someone needs to tell him personally. Can you do that?" "Oh, good," she said. She paused. "How close are we?" "Close," he said. "Days, maybe less." She looked out at the empty space where the greenhouse had been, at the bare earth where her vegetable beds used to be, at the gravel drive where Thomas's gate used to stand. "Then let's not waste any more time," she said. She hung up the phone and went back to the fence. "Pull it tight. Anchor it properly. Don't rush the tension or it won't hold." She kept working. Meanwhile, Richard Caldwell was not sleeping well either, though the reasons were different. He had received a report from Hargrove that the Mitchell boy had not called back. Silence, which Hargrove framed as likely just processing time, felt less reassuring than Hargrove intended. Caldwell had built his success on reading the particular quality of silences. One had the wrong texture. He called his personal assistant, a man named Derek Cole, at 11 that night. "Has anyone spoken to the Mitchell kid directly?" Caldwell asked. Hargrove called him, Derek said. "He said he'd call back." "Hasn't, no. Find out why," Caldwell said. Derek said, "You think there's a problem?" Caldwell looked at the window of his study. He thought about the geological survey he had buried 18 months ago. He thought about the shell company in Delaware. He thought about the call he had authorized Derek to make. On the morning of the farm attack, the call to Marcus Webb's phone with very specific instructions, the call he had told Derek to make from Derek's own number so that Caldwell's direct line would not appear anywhere in the record. He thought about a 47-year-old chain of careful separations between himself and anything that could be traced. He thought about the prickling at the back of his neck. "Let's find out," he said, quietly. Derek found out the next morning. Not through his own sources, through a colleague who knew someone, the long, informal chain that runs through every industry where information is currency. He found out that Ryan Mitchell had been seen in a coffee shop in Billings with an older man that nobody could immediately identify, called Caldwell. Caldwell listened without speaking. When Derek finished, there was a very long silence. "Find out who the man was," Caldwell said. "It took until the afternoon." "Called back Phil Drummond," he said, "former investigator," with a pause. "He has connections to a motorcycle club." Chapter. Another silence, longer this time. "How fast can Hargrove move on this?" Caldwell said. "Legally, a few days at minimum." "I didn't ask how fast legally," Caldwell said. Voice had changed. The control was still there. Caldwell always had control, but underneath it, for the first time, there was something else. Something that had no time for warmth or smoothness or the careful professional distance he had maintained for 30 years. Recognized that tone. He had heard it twice before in his years working for Caldwell. It had preceded a decision that Derek had spent the following months wishing he could go back and unmake. He said carefully, "Richard, if Mitchell already transferred that recording to someone, and find out if he did," Caldwell said. "And if he did?" Silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. "Then we have a different kind of problem," Caldwell said. He hung up. Derek Cole sat with his phone in his hand for a long moment. He looked at his contacts. He looked at the number for Hargrove. He looked at his own name at the top of the call log, his number, the one he had used on the morning of the farm attack, the one that had connected to Marcus Webb's phone with instructions. See, that was what he had told Marcus to save the number as, in case Marcus's phone was ever seen by the wrong person. Caldwell, not Derek, just RC, 2 letters. He sat for a long time. Outside, a Friday afternoon was turning into a Friday evening, ordinary and unhurried, the world proceeding as if nothing had changed. But Derek Cole had spent enough years close to the machinery to know that the moment a 23-year-old sits across a table from Phil Drummond and hands over a 40-second recording, the machinery changes. And once it changes, it does not change back. Derek Cole did not sleep that night. He lay in the dark of his apartment in Billings and stared at the ceiling and ran the same calculation over and over, the way a man does when he already knows the answer, but keeps hoping the math will change. Never changed. The math was always the same. A 40-second recording plus Phil Drummond plus a 23-year-old with a conscience equaled one thing. And one thing only: the end of the careful distance Richard Caldwell had spent 30 years maintaining between himself and the consequences of his decisions. The problem for Derek Cole was not abstract. The problem was that the number Ryan Mitchell had seen on Marcus Webb's phone screen two letters, the contact Derek had told Marcus to save as a precaution, was not Caldwell's number. It was Derek's. Derek had made that call. Derek had given those instructions. Derek had said, in a flat and businesslike voice, on a cold Montana morning, yeah, all of it, the sign too. He had said those words on behalf of Richard Caldwell, under Caldwell's direction, with Caldwell's full knowledge. Recording does not capture context. A recording captures words and voices and phone numbers. And the phone number in Marcus Webb's call log was Derek Cole's. At 2:17 in the morning, Derek got up and went to his kitchen and poured himself a glass of water and stood over the sink and thought very clearly about what was coming. Caldwell's lawyers would move fast when they understood the shape of it. They would construct a narrative in which Derek had acted independently, exceeded his authority, made decisions his employer knew nothing about. Caldwell would be shocked and horrified. Caldwell would cooperate fully. Caldwell would express his deepest sympathies to Mrs. And Derek, who had spent 11 years managing Richard Caldwell's private affairs, would stand alone holding every piece of evidence that connected the whole operation to one man's decision to destroy a widow's farm over a water source. Drank the water. He set the glass down. He picked up his phone. He did not call Hargrove. He did not call Caldwell. He scrolled through his contacts until he found a name he had not dialed in 3 years, a lawyer named Susan Park, who had done some work for Caldwell's organization early in Derek's tenure before a disagreement over billing had ended the relationship. Susan Park was one of the best criminal defense attorneys in the state of Montana. And, more importantly, she was one of the few people Derek knew who had no ongoing relationship with Richard Caldwell. She answered on the fourth ring, groggy and sharp at the same time. Cole, she said, it's 2 in the morning. I know, he said. I need to talk to you, not tomorrow. Now if you can. A pause, he heard her sit up. Is this about the Harper Farm situation, she said. He was. The fact that she already knew the name told him everything about how far the story had spread. Yes, he said. Another pause, shorter this time. Are you calling me as someone who needs legal advice? Yes. Then don't say another word on this phone, she said. Come to my office. I'll be there in 40 minutes. She hung up. Derek Cole looked at his phone for a moment. Then he got dressed, and he drove through the empty 2 a.m. streets of Billings, and he walked into Susan Park's office, and he sat down across from her, and he began to talk. He talked for 2 hours. He could not know that 40 miles away, Walter Cross was also awake, sitting at a table with Ray and Phil Drummond and a man named Eddie Flores, looking through the timeline of everything they had assembled. The geological survey from the shell company, the 3 offer letters, the pattern of small sabotage on Evelyn's property in the months between offers, and Mitchell's recording, the call log they were working to subpoena through a lawyer Phil trusted in Missoula. A.M. Phil's phone rang. He looked at the screen, then at Walter. It's my contact at the county assessor's office, he said. He shouldn't be calling me at this hour, he answered. The call lasted 4 minutes. Phil said almost nothing during it. When it ended, he set the phone on the table and looked at Walter with an expression that Walter Cross had seen on Phil Drummond's face exactly once before, the particular expression of a man who has just discovered that the problem he was investigating is substantially larger than the problem he thought he was investigating. Second parcel, Phil said. Walter said, what? The aquifer doesn't stop at Evelyn's property line. We knew it extended northeast. What we didn't know, what my contact just confirmed from a set of development applications filed 3 weeks ago, is that Caldwell already purchased the 2 parcels northeast of the Harper Farm through separate shell companies. He's been assembling a ring around her. Phil leaned forward. If he gets the Harper parcel, he controls the entire aquifer. Every access point, every development right. He doesn't just build one luxury community. He controls the water supply for a corridor of development running across 3 counties. The table was very quiet. Ray said slowly, he's not buying a farm, buying a region. The farm is the keystone, Phil said. Without it, the other parcels are worth a fraction of what they'll be worth with it. With it, he has something worth hundreds of millions over the next 20 years. Walter did not move for a long moment. Then he said, Evelyn's farm is the one piece he can't build around. So when she wouldn't sell, he had no choice but to remove her, Phil said. Remove landed on the table with a weight that nobody wanted to examine too closely. Threaten, not pressure, actually remove her permanently if she wouldn't go voluntarily. Said quietly, "How permanent are we talking?" Phil was quiet for a moment. "I don't think we're talking about physical harm. I think we're talking about making her circumstances untenable, make her financially, destroy her ability to maintain the property, create legal complications, generate enough chaos that an elderly woman alone, without resources, without family close enough to help daily." He stopped. "You make the situation impossible enough and people leave. They leave because they have no other choice." Walter Cross stood up. He walked away from the table. He stood with his back to the room for a moment, and nobody spoke because they all understood what he was doing, because they had all been in enough rooms over enough years to know that some information requires a moment of private processing before it can be turned into action. Back, his face was completely composed. "Go public," said, "not everything. Not yet. Enough. We need Caldwell to know that the wall he built around this is already coming down, and we need him to know it publicly, because the moment he believes he can still manage this quietly, he gets more dangerous. And I will not have Evelyn Harper be the price of his desperation." He said, "What's the move?" Walter said, "We go to the farm. All of us, but not just us." He looked around the table. "Everyone," he said. "Every chapter. Every man who can get to Willow Creek within 72 hours. And tell them to come ready to stand quietly and let the cameras do the work." Eddie Flores, who had not said a word in the last 20 minutes, looked up. "How many are we talking?" Walter Cross picked up his phone. He said that nobody in this state can pretend they didn't see it. He started dialing. The next 48 hours moved with the particular compressed intensity of a situation that has been building slowly for months and then releases all at once. Phil Drummond's contact in Missoula confirmed that the subpoena for Marcus Webb's call records had been approved through a judge who, unlike several others in the Western District, had no professional relationship with Caldwell's lawyers. And Mitchell sat with Susan Park, not knowing she was also Derek Cole's lawyer, a coincidence that would create its own complications later, and reviewed his statement for the third time. Shelley Briggs pulled additional records from the county office and found not 2 but 4 shell companies with connections to Caldwell's operation, each holding a piece of land in the aquifer corridor. And Richard Caldwell, waking on a Saturday morning to a report from Hargrove that the subpoena had been filed and that Derek Cole had not responded to 3 calls since the previous night, felt the prickling at the back of his neck become something colder and more specific. He called Hargrove directly. "Tell me exactly what we know," he said. Hargrove told him. The subpoena, the geological survey connection that someone had clearly made, recordings, that, according to what Hargrove had pieced together through his own channels, had been in Ryan Mitchell's phone since the morning of the attack and was now in the hands of someone connected to a Billings-based investigator with ties to Hargrove, actually paused before saying it ties to the Hells Angels. Caldwell was very quiet. "How solid is the recording?" he said. "I don't know the contents," Hargrove said, "but if Mitchell was close enough to Webb during that call to capture audio, made that call," Caldwell said. Hargrove was quiet. Hargrove. "Derek made the call, his number, his voice. I was not on that call." Hargrove said very carefully, "Richard, I understand what you're telling me, but if Derek decides," and Derek, Caldwell said, "today. I've been trying since last night," Hargrove said. "He's not answering." The silence on the line was total. Caldwell said, "Find him anyway." He hung up. He sat for a long time. 30 years. 30 years of building separations and buffers and distances. 30 years of making sure that when something went wrong, and things always eventually went wrong, in any operation of sufficient scale, there was always a layer between himself and the consequence. Cole was supposed to be that layer. And Derek Cole had gone silent. Caldwell called his CFO. He called his lead development attorney. He called the man who managed his shell company registrations. He made 6 calls in 40 minutes, and in each one he gave the same quiet, controlled instruction. Review everything connected to the Montana Aquifer Project and identify anything that creates a direct line to my personal involvement. Anything. I need to know before anyone else does. He was still on the phone with the 6th call when his assistant, his public assistant, not Derek, knocked on the study door and opened it without waiting, which she never did. He looked up. "I'm sorry," she said, and her voice had the quality of someone delivering news they wish they didn't have. news vans outside the building. He looked at her for one long second. He said. 3, she said. Someone just sent a clip. It's on 2 local stations already. She hesitated. Are motorcycles assembling at the Harper farm? He dismissed her with a look and turned back to the window. Years ago, when he had commissioned that first geological survey through Blue Ridge Land Assessment LLC, he had been absolutely certain that the execution was clean enough to survive any scrutiny short of a federal investigation. The shell company was real. The survey was real. The land acquisition strategy was aggressive but legal at every documented step. What he had not accounted for was a 23-year-old boy standing in the wrong place with his phone already recording. What he had not accounted for was a 68-year-old widow who refused to leave. What he had not accounted for was Thomas Harper's friendships. He stood up. He went to the window. He looked at the news vans on the street below. Their satellite dishes extended. Their cameras pointed at the front of his building. In a very long time, Rich Caldwell did not immediately know what his next move was. Feeling unfamiliar, cold, deeply unwelcome, sat in his chest like something swallowed wrong. At Evelyn's farm, the sound began just after dawn on Saturday. Evelyn heard it before she could identify it, a low rhythmic rumble that seemed to come from the road in both directions simultaneously. She was in the kitchen making coffee. She set the cup down and stood still and listened. Dale Hutchins called her before she could get to the window. "Evelyn," he said, and his voice had something in it she had not heard from Dale in a long time. Something almost like awe. "You need to come outside." She went outside. The road in front of her farm, the road she had looked at every morning for 40 years, the road Thomas had driven his truck down 10,000 times, was filling with motorcycles. Not a handful, not the 3 that had come before. And as she stood at her wire fence and watched, the dozens became more. Walter Cross was already there, standing near the gate, turned when he heard her. "How many?" she said. "Still coming in," he said. "Last count was 87. On the way from Helena." She looked at the road. "They came from everywhere," he said. "Some of them drove through the night." He paused. "Mrs. Harper, I want to be clear about something. They're not here to threaten anyone. Not here to confront anyone. They're here because they wanted to be here. Because when I made those calls, not one person I spoke to said no." She looked at him. "Why?" He met her eyes. "Because your husband was known," he said simply. Thomas Harper was the kind of man who people remember for the right reasons. And people who remember a man like that don't sit still when something like this happens to the people he loved. She pressed her lips together hard. She looked at the road. "Hated the attention," she said. "I know," Walter said. "Was. That's probably why he would have deserved it." By 8 in the morning, there were 104 motorcycles parked along the road in front of Evelyn Harper's farm. The news cameras arrived at 8:15. By 9, the footage was being streamed live on 3 platforms simultaneously. By 9:30, the story had broken nationally, not because of anything dramatic, not because of any confrontation or speech or organized demonstration, because 104 people had driven from across the state of Montana, and in 3 cases, from across state lines to stand quietly in front of a damaged wire fence on a piece of land that belonged to a 68-year-old widow. And they were not loud. They were not threatening. They were just there, in numbers that meant something, in a silence that said everything the cameras needed to say for them. A reporter from the Missoula station approached Walter and asked if he had a statement. Walter thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "We're here because a woman who shouldn't have to fight alone is being made to fight alone." He dopes. "And we don't think that's right." That's the whole statement. The reporter asked about Richard Caldwell. Walter said, "We're going to let the evidence do the talking on that." Reporter pressed. "There are reports of a recording." There are reports of a lot of things," Walter said. "Everything I know is mine to say right now. But I'll tell you this, before this week is over, there won't be a single person in this state who doesn't know exactly what happened on that farm and exactly why." He walked away from the camera. Inside the wire fence, Evelyn was standing with her daughter, Patricia, who had driven up from Bozeman at 5 a.m. after Walter called to tell her what was coming. Patricia was 52 years old, and she had her mother's eyes and her father's jaw, and she was holding Evelyn's hand with both of hers, and Evelyn was letting her. Patricia said quietly, looking at the road. "I see it," Evelyn said. "Did you know this was coming?" "Walter told me last night. I didn't know it would look like this." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Dad would have, I know, Evelyn said. They stood together and looked at the road, at the 104 people, standing in the cold Montana morning, and the cameras, and the satellite vans, and the ordinary sky above all of it that was the same sky it had always been. What neither of them knew was that 200 miles away, in Susan Park's office, something had just happened that would accelerate everything. Cole had been talking to Susan Park for the better part of 2 days. And in that time, he had said a great many things that were on the record and a great many things that were not. What Derek wanted, he was, fundamentally, was what every person in his situation wants, and he was, to separate himself from the worst of what he had done by demonstrating that he had information the authorities needed and was willing to provide it. Susan Park was experienced enough to know that what Derek had was genuinely significant and that the window for him to use it advantageously was closing with every hour that passed. Was. At 8 that morning, while the motorcycles were still arriving at Evelyn's farm, Susan Park picked up the phone and called the Missoula field office. She asked to speak to someone in the fraud and financial crimes unit. She said she represented a client with material evidence regarding a conspiracy to deprive a Montana landowner of property rights through coordinated fraud, intimidation, and deliberate destruction of property. She said her client was willing to cooperate. She said they needed to move quickly. The agent she spoke to was named Karen Walsh. Karen Walsh had been working financial crimes in Montana for 11 years, and she had a file on Richard Caldwell that was thin in the way that files on careful men are always thin, full of edges, and shadows with nothing solid enough in the center to hold. She had looked at that file many times over many years and set it back down. She did not set this call down. "Tell your client to come in this afternoon," she said, "and tell him to bring everything." Susan Park called Derek, arrived at the field office at 2 in the afternoon, with a flash drive, personal phones, tact phone, and a memory that had been in service to Richard Caldwell for 11 years without ever having been asked to perform what it was now being asked to perform. He sat across from Karen Walsh and another agent, and he began the geological survey. He confirmed the shell companies. He confirmed the acquisition of the surrounding parcels. He confirmed the decision made in Caldwell's study, in Caldwell's voice, with Derek present and taking notes to escalate pressure on Evelyn Harper after the third rejected offer. He confirmed that Caldwell had explicitly authorized direct action on the property, using that phrase, and that Derek had interpreted that authorization and executed it by calling home Marcus Webb and providing specific instructions. He confirmed that Caldwell knew the instructions had been given. He confirmed that after the attack, Caldwell had called Derek to confirm it had gone as directed. Walsh did not change her expression during any of this. She asked questions in a flat, professional voice. She asked follow-up questions. She asked Derek to go back and clarify 3 separate points. Then she asked, "Do you have any documentary evidence to support what you've just told us?" Put his hand on the flash drive on the table. 11 years of private communications, financial transfers, and internal memos, he said. "Some of it is encrypted. I have the keys." Karen Walsh looked at the flash drive. Then she looked at Derek. "Mr. Cole," she said, "I want to be very clear with you. What you're describing is a serious federal matter, and what happens next is going to depend heavily on the completeness and accuracy of what you've provided. Is anything at all that you have not told us? Now is the time." He said, "There's one more thing." Walsh waited. 3 weeks before the attack, Derek said, Caldwell authorized a second phase. If the property damage and intimidation didn't produce a sale within 60 days, there was a second phase. Legal interference, manufacturing a property dispute using a fraudulent survey from a different firm to create a competing claim on the land title. It would have tied the farm up in litigation for years. He paused. The fraudulent survey was already commissioned. "I have the invoice." It was very still. He wasn't going to stop at vandalism, Derek said. He was never going to stop. The room was quiet for a long time. Walsh said to the other agent, "Get the AUSA on the phone." The federal prosecutor was on the phone within 20 minutes. Walter Cross learned that a federal investigation had been formally opened at 4:15 that afternoon when Phil Drummond called him from outside the field office where he had a contact. Walter was still at the farm. He had not left. He had stood on that road with his people through the morning and into the afternoon, and when the news cameras finally moved on to their next story, He was still there. He answered Phil's call without moving from his spot. Said, "It's federal now." Walter let out a long breath. "Solid," he said. Derek Cole walked in with 11 years of documentation and Caldwell's voice on internal communications, authorizing the whole thing, Phil said. Shelley's Shell Company research is going to corroborate the financial structure. And Mitchell's recording corroborates the direct instruction. Webb's call log, once the subpoena hits, corroborates the chain of command. A pause. "It's solid. It's as solid as it gets." Walter was quiet for a moment. Around him, men he had known for years were talking quietly, sitting on their bikes, drink from thermoses. 104 people who had driven through the night to stand in front of a widow's fence. "Does Evelyn know yet?" Phil said. "Not yet," Walter said. "I'm going to tell her myself." He walked across the property to the farmhouse. He knocked. Patricia opened the door, saw his face, and stood back to let him in. Evelyn was at the kitchen table. She looked up when he came in. He did not waste time. "It's federal," he said. Cole Caldwell's personal assistant, the man who made the call to Marcus Webb, he went to the authorities this afternoon. He's cooperating fully. The documentation he brought covers 11 years of Caldwell's private operations. He paused. "It includes evidence of a planned second phase against you. Legal interference. A fraudulent property claim to tie this farm up in litigation for years." Evelyn was very still. "He wasn't going to stop," Walter said. "Even if the vandalism hadn't worked, he had a second plan. And if that hadn't worked, there would have been a third." She looked at the table. She looked at her hands. "He wanted this farm that badly," she said. "The farm," Walter said. "What's under it, and what the land around it becomes when he controls the water." She was quiet for a long time. Patricia had come to stand in the doorway, and the kitchen held all three of them in the particular silence of a moment that has been working toward itself for a long time and has finally arrived. And Evelyn said, "What happens to him now?" "Federal investigation. Documentation Derek brought makes this a fraud and conspiracy case at minimum. The geological survey deception adds more. The second phase plan," Walter paused. "Walsh is a very thorough investigator. Caldwell has spent 30 years being careful. Careful this time, too. But he made one miscalculation." "Which one?" Evelyn said. "He trusted that the people around him would stay loyal when it stopped being safe to be loyal," Walter said. "Men like Caldwell always make that mistake. They think the money is enough. They think the fear is enough." He looked at her. "They forget that some people, at the end of a long enough night, just cannot keep carrying what they're carrying." She looked at him. "Like Ryan Mitchell," she said. "Ryan Mitchell," he confirmed. She nodded slowly. She looked at the window, at the fields, at the empty space where the greenhouse had been. She said, "I want to ask you something. When this is over, when Caldwell faces whatever he faces, and the legal situation resolves, and the cameras go somewhere else," she paused. "What happens to Ryan Mitchell?" Walter held her gaze. "That depends partly on prosecutors and partly on judges and partly on what he continues to cooperate with. The fact that he came forward voluntarily, that he preserved evidence, that he refused Caldwell's lawyer's pressure to stay quiet, that matters. It matters legally and it matters otherwise. I want him to know," she said, "that I don't hold what he did against him. Not the being there, not even the not stopping it immediately. I want him to know that what he did afterward, that's what I see when I think about him." Walter looked at her for a moment. "I'll tell him," he said. She said he should hear it in person. Walter Cross was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know, Thomas Harper was exactly this kind of person." She smiled. It was a small smile, and it was tired, and it was completely real. "I know," she said. "That's why I married him." Outside, the last of the motorcycles were still on the road. The afternoon light was going long and golden across the damaged fields, across the bare ground where the vegetable beds would grow again in spring, across the wire fence that was holding and would hold until the real gate was rebuilt. The Montana sky was enormous and beautiful above all of it. And Richard Caldwell, in a study 200 miles away, was on the phone with Hargrove for the last time, listening to a man tell him in the careful language of an attorney who sees the wall coming that the wall was coming, that 30 years of careful construction was not going to be enough, and that the only remaining question was how far the damage would spread before it stopped. Caldwell held the phone and said nothing for a very long time. Then he said, "Get me a different lawyer." And somewhere in the long chain of decisions that had started with a geological survey and ended with 104 motorcycles on a country road, the last piece of insulation between Richard Caldwell and the truth of what he had done finally gave way. Hargrove found a different lawyer for Caldwell by Sunday morning, was Preston Vance, and he was the kind of attorney who cost more per hour than most people in Willow Creek made in a month. He flew in from Seattle on a private charter, walked into Caldwell's study with a leather briefcase and the composed, unreadable face of a man who had spent 30 years standing between powerful people and the consequences of their decisions. He sat down, opened the briefcase, and spent 4 hours reviewing everything Hargrove had assembled about the case. At the end of 4 hours, he closed the briefcase and looked at Caldwell. "Tell me something honestly," he said, "not as your client, as a man. Is there anything you have not told me?" Caldwell looked back at him with the controlled steadiness of someone who has been asked this question many times in many forms over many years and has always had the same answer. "Nothing material," he said. Vance studied him for a moment. "Cole has been in that field office for 2 days," he said. "2 days, Richard. That is not a brief conversation. A man does not spend 2 days in a federal field office unless he is providing something with weight to it, with volume." He paused. "I need you to understand that whatever you believe Derek does or does not know, whatever you believe he does or does not have, the prosecutors are going to come at this as though he handed them the entire operation on a platter." He probably did. Caldwell said Derek was the executor. The decisions. "Stop." Vance's voice was quiet, but it had an edge in it like a door closing. "Do not finish that sentence in this room. Do not finish it anywhere. Because the moment you establish that Derek was executing your decisions, you have placed yourself directly inside the chain of command, which is precisely where you do not want to be." He leaned forward slightly. "Right now, the best available position, the only available position, is that Derek Cole acted with a degree of independent judgment that exceeded his authority. That conversations were misunderstood, that instructions were interpreted in ways that were never intended, that Richard Caldwell, whatever his business interests in the Harper property, never authorized illegal action of any kind." Caldwell was quiet. "Can you maintain that position?" Vance said. A long pause. "I can maintain any position that the evidence permits," Caldwell said, looked at him for another moment. "The evidence," he said carefully, "is the question. What Derek Cole has on that flash drive, I need to know exactly what was on it before I can tell you what's maintainable." "I don't know exactly what he kept," Caldwell said. And for the first time in the conversation, for the first time perhaps in years, his voice had something in it that was not control. Something small and cold and genuine. "I trusted him. 11 years, I trusted him completely." Vance did not respond to that directly. He simply said, "Then we find out." He made 3 calls in the next hour. The third call lasted 22 minutes. When it ended, he set the phone on the desk with a precision that somehow communicated more than any expression would have. "The flash drive contains internal communication records going back 9 years," he said. "Financial transfer documentation tied to the shell companies. Audio recordings. Derek apparently recorded a number of his private conversations with you, which in Montana is a one-party consent state, meaning those recordings are legal." He paused. "And a document. A planning document from 18 months ago that outlines in some detail the acquisition strategy for the aquifer corridor, including the contingency plans." Caldwell said nothing. "Including the second phase litigation strategy," Vance said, "which you apparently wrote yourself and sent to via encrypted message. Name on it, Richard. Your name." The room was completely silent. "The encrypted message platform you used," Vance continued, his voice unchanged in tone, but somehow heavier with each word, "had the decryption keys. He provided them to the investigators. Every message you sent through that platform for 9 years is now readable by federal prosecutors." Caldwell stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to the room and said nothing for a very long time. Waited. He was a patient man. Finally, Caldwell said, without turning around, "What are my options?" "Operation," Vance said. "Full, immediate, and genuine. It is the only option that preserves any meaningful future. The documentation is too complete and the corroborating evidence from too many independent sources to construct a viable defense at trial." He paused. "And Richard, there is another consideration." Caldwell turned. "The families," Vance said. "The 5 other young men who were on that farm. Their families retained attorneys the moment this went federal. are going to be looking for ways to protect their clients. The cleanest way to protect a peripheral participant is to establish that they were directed by someone with authority over them. Webb's family has resources. They will not hesitate to spend them pointing in your direction if it reduces Marcus's exposure. He met Caldwell's eyes. You need to move before they do. Caldwell looked at him for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, set up the meeting. He turned back to the window. Outside, the street was ordinary. People moving, cars passing. A Sunday afternoon in a city that did not yet know what was about to happen inside the office building that Richard Caldwell had worked in for 22 years. The call to Karen Walsh's office was made at 4:15 that afternoon. Was still at the field office. She had not gone home since Friday. Her third coffee and her second read-through of the financial documentation when the call came in. She listened to Vance's assistant explain that his client was prepared to discuss a cooperation framework. She said she would call back within the hour with a time. She hung up and looked at her partner, Agent Don Reeves, across the desk. Caldwell wants to talk, she said. Reeves set down his pen. How soon? Tomorrow, she said. Vance wants tomorrow morning. Reeves was quiet for a moment. He's moving fast. He knows what Cole gave us, Walsh said. Vance is too good not to know. He's moving fast because the Marcus Webb family is also moving fast, and whoever gets to us first gets the better deal. She picked up her coffee. It's a race now. To cooperate, Reeves said. The particular dryness in his voice was the dryness of a man who has seen this particular race run many times. To cooperate, Walsh confirmed. Phil Drummond called Walter at 6 that evening with the information. Passed through the same contact chain that had been running all week. Walter was still at the farm. He had not spent a night away from it since Thursday. He took the call outside, standing near Evelyn's wire fence in the early dark, the Montana cold settling in around him. Caldwell's cooperating, Phil said. His lawyer called Walsh's office this afternoon. They meet tomorrow. Walter let out a slow breath. And Webb's family? Their attorney made a similar call an hour later, Phil said. Walsh's office has 2 cooperation requests sitting on her desk right now. Which one does she take? Both probably in some form. The question is sequencing and terms. Phil paused. Walter, this is moving toward resolution, real resolution. Not just charges, the whole structural picture. The aquifer scheme, the shell companies, the second phase plan, all of it. Walter looked at the dark road, at the wire fence, at the property he had been standing watch over for the better part of a week. What does Evelyn need to know tonight? He said. That it's working, Phil said. That's all. He went inside and told her. She was at the kitchen table, where she seemed to always be the center of a house that had organized itself around her steadiness for 40 years. Patrice there. And Ray, and a woman named June who was Ray's wife and who had driven up from Billings with a container of soup that had been the best thing any of them had eaten all week. Walter sat down and told Evelyn what Phil had told him. Listened with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup the way she always listened. When he finished, she said, he's cooperating because he has no choice. Yes, Walter said. That's not the same as being sorry, she said. Walter said, it's not. She nodded slowly. And the families of the young men? Their attorneys are also talking to investigators, he said, for a moment. All of them? Webb's family for certain. The others, it depends on what their individual exposure looks like. Evelyn set her cup down. I keep thinking about Ryan Mitchell, she said. Not about what he did on my farm. About what he did after. The 4 days he carried that recording before he had the courage to use it. She paused. Most people don't have that kind of courage. Most people find a way to put the recording in a drawer and tell themselves they had no choice. June, who had been quiet until now, said, don't hate any of them, do you? Quite a question. Evelyn looked at her. Hate is too heavy to carry on top of everything else I'm already carrying, she said. And it doesn't fix the greenhouse. It doesn't put the sign back up. She looked at the window. What fixes things is people doing the right thing, even late, even scared, even when it costs them something. Ryan Mitchell did the right thing. Eventually, Derek Cole did the right thing. Even if they did it to save themselves at some level, they still had to choose it. She paused. Thomas used to say that you can't always control when people find their conscience, but you can make it easier for them to use it once they find it. He said quietly, how do you make it easier? By not making them feel like it's too late, she said. By not treating the lateness as the whole story. The kitchen was very quiet. looked at the woman across the table from him, the woman whose farm he had arrived at through a chain of loyalty that stretched back 17 years to a man he would never see again, and he thought that Thomas Harper had been right about a great many things, and that the most important thing he had been right about was the person sitting across this table. Monday arrived with the particular weight of a day that has been building toward itself all weekend. Walsh met with Vance and Caldwell at 9 in the morning. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Walsh said almost nothing for the first 2 hours. She let Caldwell and Vance construct the narrative they had prepared, the misunderstandings, the exceeded authority, the intentions that had been clean until execution had distorted them. She let Caldwell talk, because every word Caldwell said either corroborated what she already had or added something new, and either outcome was useful. Then at the 2-hour mark, she opened a folder and put 3 documents on the table. Was a printout of an encrypted message sent from Caldwell's account to Derek Cole 18 months ago, outlining the aquifer acquisition strategy. Caldwell's name was in the header. Caldwell's language was in the body. Aggressive appeared 4 times. The phrase "by any means necessary" appeared once. Caldwell looked at it and said nothing. The second document was a financial summary of the 4 shell company transactions, the land purchases surrounding Evelyn's farm. Each transaction was time-stamped and linked by a chain of transfers that Phil Drummond's research had helped to map, confirmed now through Derek Cole's documentation. Caldwell looked at it and said nothing. The third document was a transcript of a conversation between Caldwell and Derek Cole 6 days before the attack on Evelyn's farm. It had been reconstructed from Derek's. In it, Caldwell said, "She's not going to sell. We've tried 3 times. We need to change the conversation." And Derek said, "What does that mean, change the conversation?" And Caldwell said, "It means he needs to feel like staying is more expensive than leaving." Caldwell looked at the transcript for a long time. Then he looked at Walsh. She said, "Mr. Caldwell, I'm going to give you an opportunity to speak accurately to me now. Not the version your attorney prepared, the accurate version, because I want you to understand something." She folded her hands on the table. "We have enough. We have more than enough. The question before you is not whether this case precedes it, proceeds. The question is whether you are an active part of resolving it or whether you are a passive subject of it. Those 2 positions produce very different outcomes." He leaned toward his client. They had a brief, quiet exchange. Then Caldwell straightened. He put his hands flat on the table. "Be any means necessary," he said, meant financial pressure, legal pressure. "I did not authorize physical property damage." Walsh said, "The transcript I just showed you, I said she needed to feel like staying was more expensive than leaving." Caldwell said, "I meant through offer structures." Through Mr. Caldwell, Walsh's voice was quiet and absolute. "Cole is currently in another room in this building, writing a detailed account of a conversation that took place in your study in which explicitly he approved the use of terms. And I am quoting from his statement, action on the property itself. He describes your tone, describes the specific language. He describes the instruction to proceed through Marcus Webb." She paused. "I have his account. I have the recording Ryan Mitchell captured during the call log, showing Derek Cole's number connected to Marcus Webb's phone on the morning of the attack. I have the financial documentation. I have your encrypted messages." She looked at him steadily. "What I am offering you, right now, in this room, is the opportunity to be honest about your role in a way that may be reflected in the resolution of this case. What I am not offering you is the opportunity to construct a version of events that the evidence does not support." Very still. Vance said quietly, "Richard." Caldwell looked at the transcript on the table. He looked at it for a long time. Words he had said in his own study on a Wednesday evening. Words he had considered strategic and proportional and appropriate to the size of the prize he was pursuing, that had traveled from his mouth to Derek's ear to a recording to a printed page in a federal conference room. He said, "What are the terms?" Walsh, "Full accounting, complete disclosure of the aquifer scheme, the shell companies, the acquisition strategy, cooperation with the investigation into the property damage and all parties involved, restitution to Mrs. Harper, full restoration of the property, compensation for damages, and a formal acknowledgement of the fraud scheme directed at her land." She paused. "In exchange for cooperation, the office will consider the nature and timing of the disclosure in its recommendations to the court." Not make you promises I cannot keep. But I will tell you that a man who takes full responsibility and makes genuine restitution stands in a substantially different position than a man who does not. Another long silence. Then Caldwell said in a voice that was very quiet and very flat and completely stripped of the smoothness that had been its permanent characteristic for 30 years. All right. He said it the way a man says something when he has finally stopped negotiating with a reality that was never going to negotiate back. Vance made a note. Walsh said, "We'll take a short break and then we'll begin from the beginning." She walked out of the room and down the hallway to where Reeves was standing with his arms folded. "He's in," she said. Reeves said, "All the way?" "All the way," she said. "Get the recorder set up." She went to get her fourth coffee of the morning. At 11:15, while Caldwell was in the conference room beginning his full account, Webb's attorney called Walsh's office and was told by an assistant that the office was currently occupied with another matter and would return the call. Webb's attorney understood what that meant and told him. Marcus Webb, who was 28 years old and had spent the past week believing that his family's money and his family's lawyers and his family's connections would create the same buffer for him that money and lawyers and connections had always created for the around him. People bums sat in his apartment and heard his attorney say the words "Caldwell is already talking," and felt, for the first time in his life, the specific and unmistakable sensation of a floor giving way beneath him. "What does that mean for me?" he said. His attorney was quiet for a moment. "It means we need to have a very honest conversation," he said, "about what you remember and what you're willing to say." Marcus was quiet. He thought about the morning on the farm. He thought about his phone in his hand, the camera running, the old woman kneeling in the mud. He thought about how he had filmed her picking up the pieces of that sign. He thought about how he had posted the video that night, laughing, thinking it was the kind of thing that would disappear in a week, the way things always disappeared. It had not disappeared. He thought about Ryan Mitchell standing in the background of that morning, not laughing as loudly as the others, looking at something in the middle distance, with an expression Marcus had not registered at the time, but could see now, in his memory, with perfect clarity. Ryan had known, or had begun to know, and Ryan had done something about it. He thought about the call he had received that morning, the call from R. See the flat, businesslike voice. Yeah, all of it. The sign, too. He had followed those instructions without questioning them. He had followed them because the voice on the phone was connected to his father's business connections, and because following felt like the path of least resistance, and because he had never, in 28 years, been asked to pay a price for the path of least resistance. Now the bill had arrived. He said to his attorney, "What do I need to do?" His attorney told him. Marcus Webb called his father before he called the attorney back. He sat in his apartment with his phone in his hand and listened to his father answer, and for a long moment he could not speak. "Marcus," his father said, "what's happened?" "I need to tell you something," Marcus said, "and I need you to not interrupt me until I'm done." His father was quiet. Marcus told him everything, not the legal version, not the version the lawyers had been crafting all week. The actual version, what the call from Derek Cole had said, what Marcus had understood it to mean, what he had done with that understanding, what he had filmed, what he had posted, what he had felt watching that video go everywhere, and seeing Evelyn Harper's face in the thumbnail. He talked for 20 minutes. His father did not interrupt. Marcus finished. The line was silent for a long time. And his father said, in a voice Marcus had not heard from him before, "Why?" Called and said, "Not why you went," his father said. "Why you filmed her, why you posted it." Marcus had no answer for that. He had not had an answer for it since the morning it happened. He had been looking for one all week in the space between his ribs where something cold had been sitting since the moment he watched the truck roll over that sign. "I don't know," he said. And for the first time since this started, spoke slightly on the words. His father was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Then that's what you're going to have to live with, understanding that you don't know, that you did something that hurt a person badly, and you don't even have the defense of having had a reason." A pause. "You're going to cooperate fully. You're going to say everything you know about that call and where it came from and what was said. And then you're going to think very seriously about what comes after that." "What comes after that?" Marcus said. "That woman's farm," his father said. "You're going to find out what it costs to fix what you broke, and you're going to pay it." Marcus said nothing for a moment. Dad, you drove a truck through her greenhouse, his father said. You filmed her crying in the mud, and you put it on the internet so people could laugh at her. You're going to fix it. Not lawyers, not a check from a distance. Stand me? A long silence. Yes, Marcus said. I understand. He hung up. He sat for a long time. Then he called his attorney back and said the words his attorney needed to hear. Broke publicly on Tuesday. Not through a press release. Not through an official announcement. The particular kind of information leak that happens when enough people in enough offices know enough of the shape of a story that pieces of it begin appearing in enough places simultaneously that the shape becomes undeniable. Investigation, aquifer fraud, shell companies. Richard Caldwell, $100 million in concealed development value. The deliberate targeting of a widow's farm as the keystone of a 30-year land acquisition that would have given one man effective control over a regional water supply. It landed like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples moved fast. Caldwell's development company lost 40% of its partnership agreements within 72 hours. 3 city council members in 2 counties who had attended Caldwell's fundraisers issued statements. 2 of them returned donations. The 3rd hired a lawyer. National media arrived in Willow Creek on Wednesday morning. Not just local stations, the farm, the wire fence, the bare ground where the greenhouse had been, the gravel drive where the gate had been, was on television screens across the country by Wednesday afternoon. Evelyn did not give interviews. She made one statement, brief and final, which Patricia read to a group of reporters at the gate. Belongs to my family, and it will continue to belong to my family. The people who tried to take it underestimated what this land means and who will stand up for it. I am grateful beyond words for everyone who stood here. Now I'd like to get back to work. That was all she said publicly. On Thursday morning, she did something nobody expected. She called Ryan Mitchell. She had gotten his number from Walter, who had gotten it from Phil Drummond. She dialed it herself from the kitchen table, and she waited while it rang 3 times. He answered on the 4th ring. His voice was careful, braced the voice of a young man who had been receiving calls all week and had learned to answer them with a layer of protection already in place. She said, "This is Evelyn Harper." A long silence. He said. His voice changed completely. Protection fell away, and what was underneath it was very young and very tired. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I don't know if... Stop, she said, gently but clearly. I'm not calling to hear you apologize. You've been apologizing to lawyers and investigators all week. No, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not an investigator. He was quiet. I'm calling, she said, to tell you that I know what it cost you to make that call to Walter. I know that you carried that recording for 4 days and that there were probably moments when you almost didn't make the call. And I want you to know that I see that, not the 4 days. Call. That's what I see. He did not speak for a moment. He did. His voice was unsteady in a way he was clearly trying to control. I should have stopped it, he said. I was there and I didn't stop it. Maybe, she said. But you were 23 years old and you were with people you thought were your friends and you made a bad decision in a bad moment. And you spent 4 days with a choice in your pocket and you made the right decision. She paused. Thomas, my husband, he used to say that a person's character isn't what they do in the easy moments. It's what they do with the hard moments after the easy moments go wrong. Quiet. Come out to the farm, she said, when this is all settled. Come out and see what you helped protect. I think you should see it. Another long silence. You want me to come to your farm, he said, quite believing it. I want you to come to my farm, she confirmed. Work clothes. There's a lot that still needs fixing, and I have a feeling you've got 2 good hands. A sound from his end of the line, not quite a laugh, not quite a cry. Something in between, something honest. Yes, ma'am, he said. I do. Good, she said. I'll see you when the time is right. She put the phone down on the table. She sat for a moment in the quiet kitchen, in the house Thomas had built, on the land that was still hers. Outside, the morning was cold and clear and full of Montana light, the kind of light that falls across wide ground and does not apologize for how much it reveals. She got up and put on her coat and went outside to check the fence. It was holding. The federal charges against Richard Caldwell were filed on a Thursday, 6 weeks after the morning. 6 trucks broke through Evelyn Harper's gate. And Walsh called Phil Drummond when the paperwork was signed and in the system. Phil called Walter. Walter was at his kitchen table in Billings eating breakfast, and he put down his fork and sat very still for a moment after he heard the words, "The way a man sits when something he has been holding tense inside him finally releases." "All counts," he said. "All counts," Phil said. "Conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud across 3 separate transactions, conspiracy to deprive a landowner of property rights through coordinated intimidation, and the second phase litigation plan at account of attempted fraud on the court, because the fake survey was already commissioned and partially executed, which means it crossed from planning into action," said. "And Derek Cole, cooperating witness, reduced exposure in exchange for the documentation and testimony. He's not walking away clean, but he's walking away." "And Caldwell?" Phil was quiet for a moment. "Vance is the best criminal defense attorney in the Pacific Northwest," he said. "And even Vance knows that the weight of what Walsh has is not survivable at trial. The question is plea terms. Caldwell's people are negotiating hard, but the number of counts and the dollar value of the fraud scheme." He paused. "He's not going to be building anything for a long time, Walter. Not luxury communities, not anything else." Walter sat with that. Outside his kitchen window, Billings was going about its ordinary Thursday morning. People driving to work, kids waiting for school buses. The completely unremarkable surface of a day that had, underneath it, the resolution of something that had started with a geological survey and ended with a 68-year-old widow refusing to let go of 40 acres of Montana soil. "What about the Webb family?" Walter said. Marcus cooperated fully. He negotiated a plea to a reduced charge, criminal mischief, restitution, community service. The other 4 young men took similar arrangements with varying degrees of cooperation. Phil paused again. The judge in Marcus's case added a specific condition to his restitution order. "What condition?" "He has to personally participate in the restoration of the Harper farm, not fund it. Physically participate. Minimum 30 days of labor, supervised, documented, alongside whatever contractors are brought in." Walter let that sit for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "Evelyn asked for that. She submitted a written statement to the sentencing judge." Phil confirmed. "Exactly that," she said. "And I'm told," these were her exact words, "I don't want his money at a distance. I want him to understand what it takes to build something." Walter Cross set his fork down on the table and looked at the window and thought about Thomas Harper, who he had met on an unremarkable afternoon 17 years ago, and who had done a thing for Walter that had required something from Thomas and that Thomas had done anyway, without ceremony, without expectation. He thought about how you never know, when you do something like that, where it travels, how far it goes, how many years it moves through before it arrives somewhere that matters. He thought about Evelyn Harper in the mud, holding the broken sign. He thought about 104 motorcycles on a country road. "Phil," he said, "tell Shelley and Eddie thank you." "I will," Phil said. "Ryan Mitchell?" His attorney worked out a deferred prosecution agreement. "No charges." He completes the terms: continued cooperation, community service, a period of formal probation. Given that he came forward voluntarily and his evidence was foundational to the case, Walsh recommended leniency. A pause. "He called me yesterday, actually." "Ryan did?" "Yes. He asked me if I thought Mrs. Harper was serious about wanting him to come to the farm." Phil's voice had something in it that was not quite amusement and not quite emotion, but lived in the space between the two. "I told him yes. He said he didn't know if he deserved that kind of." Phil stopped. He used the word grace. "He said he didn't know if he deserved that kind of grace." Walter said, "What did you tell him?" "I told him that deserving it and needing it weren't always the same question, and that Evelyn Harper seemed like a woman who understood the difference." Walter was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You should have been a preacher, Phil." Phil Drummond laughed a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere unguarded. "I'll pass," he said. "I've seen too much to preach at anybody." He called Evelyn next. She answered on the second ring, the way she always answered, and when he told her the charges had been filed, she said nothing for a moment. He waited. He had learned over these weeks to let her silences complete themselves. "Counts," she said. "Not a question." "All of them," he said. Another silence. "And Marcus Webb's restitution order." "The judge accepted your recommendation," he said. 30 days minimum, physical participation, documented, she said. "Then, Walter, I want to say something to you." "Friends, go ahead." "I have been thinking about what I would say when this moment came for about 3 weeks. I've had conversations in my head with you where I said all sorts of things, eloquent things, moving things, Thomas would have known exactly the right words. She paused. I don't have the right words. I just have the true ones. Those are the best kind, he said. You came to this farm because of Thomas, she said. You came because you owed him something, and you are the kind of man who pays what he owes. I understand that. But what you built here, what you and Phil and Shelley and Eddie and Ray and all those people on that road built, that went so far beyond any debt. It went somewhere that I don't have a word for. Her voice was steady, but it carried something in it that was not steadiness, something that had been compressed and held and was now, in this quiet phone call, releasing in the only way it could. Picked his people carefully, she said. He always said that the most important decisions you make are not about money or strategy or any of that, about who you let yourself be loyal to. He picked you. I understand why now, more than I ever did when he was here to explain it. Walter Cross said nothing for a moment. Then he said, simply, as he was a good man, Evelyn. And you are a good woman, and good people deserve to keep what they build. She took a breath. Come to the farm, she said, when the rebuildings start. Bring whoever wants to come. We'll be there, he said. He hung up and sat for a long time at his kitchen table in the ordinary Thursday morning. Then he got up, rinsed his coffee cup, and went to make the rest of the calls. Rebuilding began 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning in October when the Montana air carried the first real edge of winter in it. Evelyn had hired a contractor named Glenn Marsh, who was 60 years old and had known Thomas from the hardware store, where Thomas used to spend entire Saturday mornings talking to whoever was there. Glenn had called Evelyn the week after the attack, and said, when you're ready to put it back together, you call me and I don't charge you a thing. She had argued with him about that, and he had been immovable, and so she had accepted it, because some gifts are given in a way that makes refusal an insult. House frame went up first. Glenn spurked with the particular focused quiet of people who understand that the work itself is the statement. Evelyn was outside with them from 7 in the morning, not directing, not hovering, but present the way you are present for something that belongs to you. The way you bear witness to your own life being rebuilt. Ryan Mitchell arrived at 8:15. He drove a truck that was not the expensive one from the attack, an older one. Working condition, the kind of truck that suggests a person has made a decision about what they want to signal. He got out and stood for a moment looking at the property, at the greenhouse frame going up, at the new gate that Glenn's crew had installed 2 days before, fields and the wire fence and the farmhouse with its kitchen window lit yellow from inside. Evelyn saw him from across the yard. She walked toward him. He walked toward her. They met somewhere in the middle, near the gravel drive where Thomas's gate used to stand, and Evelyn Harper put out her hand, and Ryan Mitchell took it with both of his. He could not speak for a moment. She let him find it. I don't know how to, he started. Then don't, she said. Glenn Marsh is putting up the greenhouse frame, and he could use another set of hands. You know anything about construction? He blinked. I've done some. Good enough, she said. Come on. She turned and walked back toward the greenhouse, and after a moment Ryan Mitchell followed her, and within 20 minutes he was holding a section of frame while Glenn's assistant marked the anchor points, and the work had absorbed him. The way work absorbs people when they need it to absorb them completely, and without asking what they've done or who they are, or whether they deserve the mercy of having something useful to do with their hands. Walter arrived at 10 with Ray and 2 others. Tools, and they brought food, a fact that June had apparently organized, because there was far more food than 4 men needed, and it was far better than anything 4 men in leather vests would have assembled on their own. June herself arrived an hour later in a separate car with Patricia and 2 women from Patricia's church in Bozeman who had been asking for 2 weeks if there was something they could do, and had finally been given an answer. By noon there were 14 people working on the Harper farm. By 2 in the afternoon, the greenhouse frame was complete. Glenn stood back and looked at it, and then looked at Evelyn, and she stood beside him and looked at it too, and neither of them said anything for a moment, because the frame standing there where it had stood before, in the same dimensions, the same orientation to catch the morning light, was something that required a moment without words. Then Evelyn said, Thomas would have checked every joint twice, and said, I know, I already did. She smiled. Then it's right, she said. The vegetable beds came next, over the following 2 weeks. Ryan came every Saturday. He learned the layout of the farm, the way you learn something when you work it with your hands, not from a map, but from the muscle memory of doing it repeatedly, the particular slope of the ground in the northeast corner that made that section drain differently, from the way the morning light fell across the main beds at 10 o'clock and the way it moved by 3. He worked without being told what to do after the first few days. He started arriving knowing what needed doing next because he had been paying attention the time before. Evelyn noticed this. She said nothing about it for a long time. One morning, 3 weeks in, she brought him coffee while he was working on repairing the fence line at the far end of the property. He took it, and they stood for a moment in the cold morning. "You've been coming every Saturday," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Sentence requires 30 days, she said. "You've done more than 30 by now." He looked at the fence. "I know," he said. "So why are you still coming?" For a moment. "Because it's not finished," he said. She looked at him. "Ryan, the greenhouse is up. The beds are replanted. The gate is back." She paused. "The sign is the last thing. And Glenn says that's 2 more Saturdays of work. What happens after that?" He turned to look at her. He was 23 years old, and he looked younger than that in the cold morning light, and also in some other way, older than he had looked the first time she saw him from across the yard. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I've been thinking about that." He stopped. "I grew up in a world where nothing I ever did had consequences. That's not an excuse. It's what I understood the world to be. And then I was standing in your yard watching something get destroyed, and I still didn't do anything. And I thought that was the worst thing I would ever feel about myself." He paused. "The worst thing was the 4 days after. Knowing I had the recording, knowing I could do something, and watching myself almost not do it." Evelyn was quiet. "When I finally called Walter," he said, "it wasn't because I was brave. It was because I couldn't stand being the person who didn't call anymore." He looked at the fence. "I don't know who I am after all of this, but I know I don't want to be who I was before it. And coming here working on this," he shook his head, "thing I've done in my life that felt like it actually mattered to someone other than me." She looked at him for a long time. "Thomas used to hire young men," she said. "Summers, mostly. Guys who needed work and structure, and someone who would treat the work seriously and treat them seriously at the same time. He had a gift for it." She paused. "I have never done it without him. I didn't think I could." Ryan waited. "But the farm is going to need help through the spring," she said. "There's more to rebuild than the greenhouse and the beds. The irrigation system in the north field needs to be completely reworked. The storage building needs a new roof before February. We'll do what he can, but he has other jobs." She looked at Ryan steadily. "If you wanted to continue coming, not as a sentence and not as penance, but as work, with actual pay, I could use someone who knows where the northeast corner drains and why the morning light matters at 10 o'clock. Ryan Mitchell looked at her. "You're offering me a job," he said. I'm offering you the chance to earn one," she said. "There's a difference." He was quiet for a moment. The cold air moved between them, and the frost on the ground caught the light. "Yes," he said. "I want that. Then finish the fence line," she said, "and come back next Saturday." She took his empty coffee cup and walked back toward the house, and Ryan Mitchell turned back to the fence and got to work. Weeks after the federal charges were filed, Richard Caldwell entered a guilty plea, stood in a federal courtroom in Missoula on a gray November morning, and said the words "guilty, guilty, guilty" through count after count in the flat voice of a man who has processed the loss of something enormous and is now simply executing the remaining steps. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at the representatives of the families whose land had been affected by his aquifer scheme. He did not look at Karen Walsh, who sat at the prosecutor's table with her hands folded and her face completely professional. And Vance had negotiated as well as anyone could have negotiated. The total exposure had been reduced. The cooperation credit had been applied. The sentencing recommendation from the prosecution was in Vance's judgment as low as the weight of the evidence allowed. It was still 7 years. 7 years, full restitution to Evelyn Harper, calculated at 3 times the assessed damage to account for the full scope of the fraud scheme targeting her property, forfeiture of the aquifer corridor parcels, dissolution of the shell companies, bar from real estate development in the state of Montana. Caldwell said yes to all of it. He had said yes to all of it 6 weeks ago in Karen Walsh's conference room when she put 3 documents on the table. Everything since then had been paperwork. The sentencing hearing was brief. The judge, a woman named Han, Mary Tesaro, who had been on the federal bench for 19 years and had seen enough real estate fraud to write a textbook on it, looked at Caldwell over her glasses before she delivered the sentence and said, "You identified a piece of land that belonged to a woman who had built her life on it. You learned that land had hidden value she didn't know about. And rather than approach her honestly with that information, rather than negotiate in good faith with a person who had every right to know what was under her own feet, you decided to manufacture a situation in which she would have choice, but to surrender something that was hers. You used money and influence and coordinated intimidation against a 68-year-old widow, and you did it with detailed planning over an extended period of time." She paused. "This court sentences you to 7 years in federal custody." The gavel down. Caldwell's face did not change, and advance, and they exchanged a brief word. Then he was processed, and the courtroom emptied, and Karen Walsh walked into the hallway and called Phil Drummond. "Years," she said. Phil called Walter. Walter was at the farm. He had come back not for the rebuilding work, though he had helped with that too, but because it was a Wednesday. And Evelyn had told him the week before that she wanted him there when she heard the news. She had not asked him to come for emotional support in those words. She had said, "I want someone who understood why this mattered from the beginning to be here when it ends." He had understood what she meant. He had come. He was in the kitchen with Evelyn and Patricia and Ryan when his phone rang. He looked at the screen, then at Evelyn. She met his eyes. He answered. He listened for 30 seconds. He said, "Thank you, Phil." He hung up. He looked at Evelyn. 7 years, he said, full restitution. For parcels are forfeited. He cannot develop in Montana. The kitchen was very quiet. Patricia put her hand over her mouth. Then she lowered it and closed her eyes for a moment and breathed. And Mitchell looked at the table. Evelyn looked at Walter. She did not look shocked. She did not look triumphant. She looked the way a person looks when something they have been carrying for a long time has been set down, not light. Exactly. Because the carrying changes you, but no longer weighted in that particular direction. She said, "Just that." "Okay." Then she stood up and said, "I'm going to make lunch. The north fence section needs checking after. Can you do that after we eat?" And looked at her. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Patricia, the greenhouse panels need the sealant on the east joints before the freeze tonight." "Left it on the shelf in the storage, Mom," Patricia said. Evelyn looked at her daughter. "Mom," Patricia's voice was full. "He's going to prison, I know," Evelyn said. "Aren't you? Don't you want to just?" Patricia stopped. "I thought you'd be more." "What?" Evelyn said gently. "I don't know. More something." Patricia looked at her. "You wouldn't leave. You held on through everything, and now the man who tried to take it from you is going to federal prison. Doesn't that feel like something?" Evelyn was quiet for a moment. She sat back down. She looked at the table where Thomas used to sit every morning, at the chair where Walter had been sitting, at the window where the October light came through the same way it had come through for 40 years. "It feels like," she said slowly, "the right thing happened." What it feels like. Not victory, not revenge. Just the right thing finally happening. She paused. "Your father used to say that justice isn't satisfying the way people expect it to be. He said the satisfaction people look for in justice is actually just the end of the fear. And when the fear ends, you're not full of fire and triumph. Relieved. Tired and relieved and ready to go back to work." She looked at Patricia. "That's what I feel. Tired, relieved. And the east joints on the greenhouse need sealant before tonight, or the freeze will crack them." Patricia looked at her mother for a long moment. Then she laughed. Eyes warm, real. "Okay," she said. "I'll do the sealant, thank you," Evelyn said. She got up and went to the stove. Walter Cross sat at the kitchen table and watched a woman make lunch in the kitchen of a farm that was still hers, that would still be hers tomorrow, husband had built, and that she had refused to surrender when it would have been so much easier to go. He sat in Thomas Harper's chair at Thomas Harper's table, and he thought, this is what the promise was for. Not the investigation, not the legal resolution, not the 104 motorcycles on the road. All of that mattered. All of that was necessary. It was all in service of this. A woman making lunch in her own kitchen on a Wednesday afternoon in October. He thought Thomas would have agreed. The sign went back up on the first Saturday in November. Glenn Marsh had rebuilt it from the same type of wood Thomas had used, at Evelyn's specific request. She had kept one piece of the original, a fragment, with part of the H from Harper, the letters Thomas had carved with a tool he'd sharpened himself. Glenn had mounted the fragment in the back of the new post so it was inside the structure, not visible from outside, but present. Evelyn knew it was there. That was enough. The carving on the new sign was done by Dale Hutchins, who turned out to have a talent for it that surprised everyone, including Dale himself. He had spent 2 weeks on it, practicing on scrap wood, getting the letters right. Ryan read exactly what Thomas's sign had read. Harper Farm S. 1974. Built with love. Dale drove the post into the ground himself with a mechanical post driver Glenn lent him, and when the sign was secure and straight, he stepped back and looked at it for a long moment. Turned to Evelyn. "Is it right?" he said. She walked up to it. She put both hands on the post. "The way you put your hands on something you want to know is solid." She looked at the lettering. "It's right," she said. She stood there with her hands on the post. The November air was cold. Around her was quieter than it had been. In weeks, the contractors finished. The weekend helpers gone. The long burst of activity that had accompanied the rebuilding, settling back into the ordinary rhythm of a working farm in late autumn, stood back from the sign. He had helped Dale carry the post from the truck, and he had handed up tools when they were needed. And now he stood with his hands in the pockets of his work jacket, looking at the sign the way a person looks at something they helped make and are not sure they have the right to be proud of. Evelyn turned from the sign and looked at him. "Ryan," she said. He looked at her. "Come here," she said. He walked over. She put one hand briefly on his arm just for a moment, just a touch, the kind that costs nothing and carries everything. "You did a good thing," she said. "Not fixing the fence, not coming every Saturday. The first good thing. The call you made." She looked at him steadily. "It's the one that mattered. Everything else followed from that." He looked at the sign. His jaw was tight in the way that means a person is working to hold something together. "I keep thinking about the 4 days," he said. "What if I'd waited one more?" "You didn't," she said. "Ryan, you didn't wait one more day. You made the call." She paused. "That's your story. The 4 days, the call. That's the part you carry forward." He nodded. "Once, tight, the way a young man nods when he is trying to accept something true that is also painful." "Thank you," he said. For all of it, for calling me, letting me come back." "Thank Thomas," she said. He always said, if you want to know what a person is made of, give them a chance to choose better. Don't give up on them before you give them the chance." She looked at the sign. "He would have given you the chance. So I gave you the chance." Dale was already walking back to his truck, giving them the quiet of the moment with the tact of a man who has known Evelyn Harper for 30 years and understands when to be invisible. Walter was at the road. He was watching the sign from where he stood, and he thought about how things travel, how a man's choices travel forward through time long after the man himself is gone, how Thomas Harper's particular way of being in the world had moved through 17 years and across 400 miles and through a geological survey and a federal investigation and 104 motorcycles and a 23-year-old's phone call at the last possible moment and had arrived here. A sign on a post exactly was solid in the ground at the entrance to a farm that was still standing. He came to stand beside him. "You thinking about Thomas?" Ray said. "Yeah," Walter said. "What do you think he'd say?" Walter looked at the sign for a long moment. "He'd say we did all right," he said. "And then he'd ask if we wanted coffee." Ray laughed. "Sounds right." They stood for a moment in the cold November morning, the two of them, looking at a farm that was whole again. Evelyn had one more thing to do. She had planned it for weeks, though she had not told anyone about it, not Patricia, not Walter, not Dale. Private thing, the kind of thing that belongs to a person alone, the closing of a particular circle that only she could close. She waited until everyone had gone, until the truck taillights had disappeared down the road, and the farm was quiet, and the November afternoon was going toward evening. Then she went inside and got the fragment from the original sign, the piece with the H from Harper that Glenn had mounted inside the new post. Glenn had made it removable, understanding somehow that she might want it back eventually. She took it into the kitchen. She sat down at the kitchen table. She put the fragment in front of her, the carved letter facing up, and she put both her hands flat on the table on either side of it. "We held it," she said, to the empty kitchen, to the chair across from her, to the man who was not there and had not been there for 3 years and 2 months, and some number of days she had stopped counting out loud. And was, "I know you knew," she said. I know you understood what was under this ground, in some way, even when you didn't have the exact words for it. I know you turned away that man 6 years ago because something in you knew. And I know that the sign, the one you carved, I know, that was the thing that finally. She stopped. She pressed her lips together. I'm sorry I couldn't protect it, she said. The original one. I'm sorry it's gone. She was quiet for a moment. Ryan Mitchell is coming back next Saturday, she said. And the greenhouse is up, and the beds are replanted, and the gate is solid. And Thomas, her voice broke cleanly for only a moment, the way things break when they have been held together through an extraordinary amount of pressure and are finally allowed to release. Thomas, the sign is back up. The sign is back up, and it says what it's supposed to say, and it's going to stay there. She sat for a while in the quiet kitchen. The evening light came through the window and moved across the table the way it had moved across that table for 40 years. The house was completely still around her. The farm was completely still outside. She picked up the fragment of the original sign. She held it for a moment. Then she carried it to the shelf above the fireplace, the shelf where Thomas's photograph was, where his reading glasses were still sitting in the same place he had left them 3 years ago. The small things that had been his had gathered into a kind of altar that she had never consciously constructed and would never consciously dismantle. She set the fragment there, the carved H facing out. Then she stepped back and looked at it. Built with love, she said. She went to make dinner. The farm was still hers. The sign was back. The ground held water that no one would ever steal. And the people who had tried to take what Thomas built had discovered, at considerable cost, the thing that men like Richard Caldwell always underestimate, that some things are not for sale because they are not about money, and the people who hold them are not holding them for profit, but for something older and more stubborn and far more powerful than profit. She was. They are holding them because someone they loved built them. The ground under their feet is not acreage or asset value or an aquifer corridor. It is the place where a life was lived, where a marriage was made, where the years have settled into the soil so thoroughly that you cannot separate the land from the love that was spent on it. Evelyn Harper had known this from the beginning. Thomas had known it before her. And in the end, everything was counted, the charges and the plea and the sentence and the restitution and the 104 motorcycles and the recordings and the flash drives and the federal prosecutors and all of the machinery of consequence that had been set in motion by 6 trucks breaking through a wooden gate on a cold Montana morning. In the end, the thing that had won was not strategy or evidence or legal maneuvering. The thing that had won was a woman who would not leave, and the man she loved, who had spent his life building friendships with people who never forgot a favor, who had turned away a stranger from his land, because something in him knew, carved a sign by hand, and planted it at the edge of his property and filled it with the plainest possible declaration of what the place was and what it meant. Per Farm Est, 1974, built with love. It was still standing. It would keep standing. That was the whole story. That was all of it, and it was enough.